Hey everybody, Ryan Grant here and welcome back to the YouTube channel. In today's video, basically just going to be introducing you to bulking, alright? What is bulking, how does it work, why should you do it, and how to bulk effectively as a beginner. This is I'm going to try and make this the most simple possible guide. Obviously we want to keep things as simple as possible because as the old saying goes, or as the old tale goes, I don't know, the simple things and the basics get you further if you master them instead of trying to overcomplicate things and do advanced things, all right? So if you don't know me, just a brief background, my name is Ryan, I'm 19 years old, and over the past 4 years, I have gained over 27 kilos of not necessarily muscle, but I'd like to say lean mass over the past 4 years. If you do want more personal help beyond these YouTube videos, I do have a free community that helps skinny men bulk and gain muscle. I won't bore you with that, and I'll talk about that later if you're interested. So without further ado right now, let's get into this video. So what is bulking and how does bulking work? Bulking basically consists of a phase in time. There's no set time limit on this. You can do it for 2 months, or you could do it for 3 years, or you could do it for a year. You can do it for any period of time. Bulking basically consists of a phase in time where you eat more food in order to gain weight and gain muscle. Obviously, the prime motive for bulking is to gain muscle, right? And to put it into really simple terms, you basically eat and consume more calories than the amount that leaves your body every day, all right? So as humans, we all have an amount we need to eat in order to stay at the same weight every single day, and that is because our body burns that amount of calories every day. So if our body burns out a certain amount of calories every day, let's say 2,000 calories, our maintenance calories in order to stay at the same weight would be 2,000 calories because we would be leveling it up. However, this is not what we want to do because we want to gain weight and gain muscle, right? And bulking consists of basically just eating slightly more than the amount that goes out. So in turn, you're going to have more energy, you're going to have more calories in your body, therefore you can put more towards your training, you can lift heavier, you're going to get stronger, therefore in turn, these calories are going to be put to use in order to gain weight and inevitably muscle, right? So that is basically how bulking works and what you need to do down to its core principles, right? So now you know what bulking is and how does it work. Why should you bulk? Okay, the reason why you should bulk is because it's the most efficient way to gain muscle. As I said, we eat more than what our body burns day to day, therefore we're going to inevitably gain weight. What this actually means as well, because we consume more calories, calories can also be known as energy, right? Therefore we've got more energy to put into our gym sessions, we've got more energy to put into our body's recovery, etc, etc. Therefore in turn we're going to be able to obviously put more towards these things, which is going to be more efficient, therefore we can progress a lot easier and in a more efficient way. The benefits of bulking to gain muscle and its efficiency behind gaining muscle can be backed through, if we go back thousands of years and we go back to our natural prime selves, right? Thousands of years ago when we were in tribes or jungles or whatever and we we're trying to survive, right? Obviously people couldn't bulk that then. They didn't know what the gym was, obviously. They didn't have much access to food. Therefore, the human body worked. So when it actually had food, it catered for the more important things like looking after our immune system, etc, etc. Therefore, building muscle is at the bottom of the priority list because building muscle doesn't necessarily, it wasn't necessarily a necessity to help us survive back in the day. However, now because we're consuming more calories, this surplus is basically going to be telling our body, right, we've got enough food, we're going to sort out our immune system, we're going to sort out the more important things that help us function day to day, and because we have this extra surplus, this extra amount of food and calories, we can now put this energy towards gaining muscle. We've got more energy towards gaining muscle, therefore it's just the most efficient way to gain muscle. It's as simple as that. So now we know what, how and why. When should you bulk? You should obviously bulk when you don't necessarily have a lot of mass to you, when you're on the more skinny side, which obviously if you're watching this video I assume you are because that's who I tailor my videos towards to, and that is obviously what who should bulk. If you're overweight watching this video, obviously if you do bulk you will gain muscle, however you do need to you do need to lose that fat. And even if you don't eat much food, if you eat in a calorie deficit, which is the complete opposite to a calorie surplus, so if you cut, because you're still beginning, you will inevitably gain muscle. However, this video isn't necessarily for you, because you don't need to be gaining weight, you need to be losing weight. But I don't think there'll be many people that need to do that watching this video. But yeah, so you should bulk when you're on the skinnier side and you want to gain this mass, and this is what bulking does. Okay, it helps you gain mass, and in turn, obviously, the most important thing for us when bulking, muscle. So obviously we know how bulking works. We've gone through what is bulking, how does it work, why should it bulk, and when should one bulk. Okay, now I'm going to run through with you guys 4 really simple but crucial tips that is going to help someone bulk, obviously as a beginner, right? So what you want to do is, obviously, as I said, you want to eat in a calorie surplus. So this surplus is basically that extra amount of food compared to the amount we burn, right? So in order to start to do this, right, it's going to be very difficult at the start, because eating more calories than our body needs is difficult on our body. And obviously, as you're a skinny guy, I'm assuming you're not necessarily used to eating too much food, right? So what you've got to do is you've actually got to start to train your body, right? You've got to start slow and progressively overload the amount of food you eat to eventually, in turn, eat in a surplus, right? A massive mistake a lot of people make is they just try and eat in a surplus straight away, which is not the way to go at all. And they try to eat more than what their body needs straight away, which is not the way to do things. And the reason this is because it's like they're trying to jump from level 1 on a ladder to level 6, right? Obviously, it's so far away, they're just going to go back down to square zero, right? They're going to have to restart again. However, if you actually climb that ladder step by step, you know, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, you're inevitably be going to get to step 6 without falling off, because you've done it the right way, right? Good things don't come to us easy, and good things don't come to us quick. So we've got to train ourselves to have the capabilities to eat this amount of food. And I want to ask you a question. Why would you try and eat this slightly more amount of food before you've even tried to eat this amount of food consistently? It doesn't make sense, right? So what I would highly suggest for you is, if you don't have a big appetite, get good at eating at your maintenance calories. Get consistent at that first, and then in turn you can increase it to a calorie surplus. And I'll give you a really good example of how starting slow and training your body to eat work. So at the start of my bulk, I started eating 4 eggs because I just come from a cutting phase, so my appetite wasn't really very high, and I wasn't able to stomach much food at that point in time. So I started off by eating 4 eggs, and obviously other stuff as breakfast, but eggs is the most important thing in this factor. So after I got consistent at 4 eggs again, I upped it to 5 eggs, and then the same thing, and then I upped it to 6 eggs, right? And that's how you train your body to eat more food. Okay, it's like with rice, right? You don't necessarily start eating 100 grams of rice straight away. Not saying you have to, but it's just an example. Start by eating 50, and then 60, and maybe 75, and then 90, and then 100 grams, right? You just want to start to train your body to stomach more food, and it's going to be a lot easier for you, right? So that's the first one. The second tip out of 4 is building your foundations, right? If you know me and you know my channel and you're a regular watcher, first of all, I really appreciate that, thank you. But you'll know how important building the foundations is. And I really like to use the analogy of building the foundations in the gym and your diet is like building a house, right? In order for a house to stay upright, if you're in a house right now, if you're in an apartment building, what's actually underneath it is foundational layers in order to hold the structure up in place. If the builders just wanted to do this thing so quick and just move on to the next property because they wanted more money, and they didn't build the foundations and they just started building the house would collapse. It wouldn't even be able to stay upright because it doesn't have the strong structure underneath. And it's the exact same thing with this. Why on earth would you try and eat in a surplus and stuff your face if you're not even good at eating a regular amount of food yet? It just doesn't make sense. And this is how people get into unhealthy eating habits, right? They say that they try to stuff themselves so much to the point where they get hungry, but they actually don't want to eat food, and they start to have a really unhealthy relationship with food, which is obviously not what you want to do. So building your foundation, starting slow, training your body to eat, and obviously increasing the calories slowly over time. Just focus on starting to increase your protein day to day, not even tracking your calories yet. Just slowly starting to eat more food, more healthy food, and that is going to obviously eventually get you to eating in a calorie surplus, right? And obviously, as you're a beginner, you don't necessarily need to eat in a calorie surplus yet to gain muscle, because your body is so sensitive to the movements and to the fuel and the protein, because it's never consumed a higher amount of that stuff before, or trained that much before, as you're going to start to now. Your body's obviously going to, because it's so sensitive, it's going to react in the same way. So if your body's this sensitive, right, your gains are going to literally go like that, right, on the complete other side of the spectrum. Say this is the middle. If your body's this sensitive, you're going to have this much of a reaction, right? So you don't necessarily even need to eat in a surplus to start. So just focus on building the foundations, just slowly increasing your protein, getting into a consistent training routine, and I'll get onto the training in a second. Just slowly starting to eat and overload the amount of food you can stomach, right? So that's the second tip. The penultimate tip, sorry, the third tip out of 4 is no dirty bulk, right? So many people have the misconception that they need to eat like a ridiculous amount of calories, for example, like 4,000 calories a day. You may have to do that. However, for a lot of people, you don't necessarily have to eat 4,000 calories at the start. And a lot of people think they can dirty bulk. However, dirty bulking isn't, it will build you muscle, obviously, because you're going to be eating more, so you can put more energy towards your sessions. However, even though you're going to be consuming lots of protein through these dirty foods, you're also going to be consuming a ridiculous amount of fat, and a lot more fat than you will protein, right? Therefore, because you're going to be consuming so much fat and so many excess calories that you don't actually need, because they're not necessarily going to be used, your body's just going to start to store them as fat. And when people dirty bulk, they go down the bad route of gaining lots of fat. Therefore, in the long term, when they have to lose that fat and they want to get shredded for summer, it's going to take a lot longer. It's going to be more mentally tough, because they've got to eat less calories as they've got to burn more fat. And it's just a worse process, and it's just, you're just making things harder for yourself, right? So I would highly suggest, when you get into the consistent swing of things, a really good way to look at it is the 80-20 rule. Because on the bulk, you do have the freedom to eat whatever you want. However, you do want to create these healthy habits to create the sustainability to be consistent and disciplined over the long term, so things are a lot easier for you and more efficient for you in the long term, right? So the 80-20 rule basically consists of eating what you want, eating what you should be, or eating the healthy foods 80% of the time, and 20% of the time you can just have whatever you want, right? To, like, for example, when I was bulking, not necessarily now because I built up these really healthy habits, but when I started, I was having junk food probably 20, maybe even 30% of the time. It doesn't hurt, and as I said, it will help you gain muscle. You've just got to watch that you don't have it too much, because you don't want to gain so much fat to the point where you'll have so much fat to lose, and it's just going to be a horrible process, right? So that's the third tip out of 4. And now moving on to the final tip of them all: calorie density of meals. As I said, as you're a beginner, right, it's going to be harder for you to stomach your meals. Therefore, you want to make your meals as calorie dense as possible. And if you don't necessarily know what calorie density refers to, it basically just refers to like the amount of calories you can compact in the smallest volume possible, right? And I'll give you guys a really good example. So back to my breakfast at the start of the bulk. So I was having 4 eggs and 2 bits of toast, right? In order to increase the calorie density, so increase the amount of calories but not necessarily increase the amount of volume, so it'll be easier to stomach and it's just more efficient, I obviously increased it to 6 eggs, which isn't too much difference in volume. I added cheese, which is another like 130 calories. I added smoked salmon or a meat of my choice into mixed with the eggs, which is really nice, by the way. I'd highly suggest that with your eggs. And instead of the 2 bits of toast, I added 2 bagels, which, yeah, the volume is slightly increased, but not much at all. And that adds another like 200 calories, and an avocado. So that meal got taken from like 650 calories straight up to 1,000 calories, and the volume and the size of the meal didn't necessarily change too much, right? So you just want to adopt the mindset, right, of how can I make this meal more dense in calories, not make it too unhealthy, and at the same time not increase the volume. Really good way to do it is adding cheese, adding sauces that you like. Um, I mean, I wouldn't suggest oils because that's just fat. But for example, in your protein shakes, right, may want to add a banana. That's another 100 calories right there. Blueberries, stuff like that. It can really, really help you. Okay. And now I want to talk about the training side of things. So, a common mistake people make is that they get really good with a diet and they like the diet so much, but they don't keep up the training, which is actually really bad because the diet is the fuel to the training. The way I like to think about this is the diet is like the fuel to the car, and the car is the training and the fuel is the diet. But if we don't have the car, aka the training, in place in the first place, then the fuel is pointless. And if you just like waste that extra fuel that you feed yourself, as I said earlier, it's just going to turn into fat. So the training is what actually builds the muscle. The diet just fuels it and makes it a more efficient process, right? So you've got to keep consistent with your training. You've got to keep consistent with your diet, and that's basically bulking for beginners. So that's the end of the video. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you have enjoyed this video. As I said at the start, if you want my personal help beyond these YouTube videos, I have got a free community that's going to be the top link in the description. We currently have 200 plus men just like you trying to bulk and gain muscle. So we do have a pretty large community and it is growing every single day and getting better every single day. As I said, there is training videos in this community. We can even hop on a one-to-one call at some point and discuss, get to know each other, and I can help point you in the right direction if you're unsure about anything. There's training videos of me in there doing the workout program that I've provided the guys with tips, tricks, etc. And there's a lot more to it. And there's a lot more coming soon as well, which is very, very exciting. And the guys in there are very, very excited too. So if you want to join that, then it's going to be the top link in the description. But if you don't, that's completely fine, no worries. If you want to stay around on the YouTube, or if you enjoyed this video, drop a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video and you learned something. Comment anything down below. And if you want to stay around, I upload every Tuesday, Thursday, Sunday, so make sure you hit that big red button down there. Without further ado, I'll see you next time.